Hi, everybody. We're back with Infernal Intercourse. I'm here with Pastor Brian. And this time we're not talking specifically about the show Lucifer. We may get that shoved in a little bit, but because Lucifer is this character who's come up from hell, we've been kind of discussing, well, where did hell come from? And even where did Lucifer come from? Really, and we're talking Satan at this point. There isn't really a Lucifer in the Bible, and we covered that in a previous episode, that the one time Lucifer is used as a name or a title in the Old Testament, it's actually referring to the king of Babylon at that time. So it actually was referring to a living person alive at the time of the person who was writing or whatever. So it didn't really refer to a supernatural character. But Satan is in there. And so we're talking a little bit about origins of Satan and the origins of hell. And so opening thoughts, Brian?
It's an interesting thing having gone through Protestant seminary, because we did read a lot of that history, but we know we have had to liberate hell, if there is a hell, right?
I think we've already discussed that neither you or I actually believe in a real hell. So
maybe hell on earth, like I always say.
Well, yeah, but an actual fiery afterlife. So just full disclosure there, people.
But my Catholic undergrad degree in theology, they did talk quite a bit about it. It's a set thing with Catholicism, and I do think it's interesting, especially how it's evolved. So I think you have quite a bit of knowledge that you've done on that. But it certainly evolves, and so therefore that's kind of interesting because, like God, it tends to be a reflection of society and culture and our assumptions, right? Rather than,
Yeah, it changes to what people, I guess, need it to be in a sense. So, yeah, in the beginning, if you look in the Old Testament, and I guess even in the New Testament, perhaps, Satan is a title. So Satan is the person, the individual who opposes, but not necessarily opposes God, but opposes someone God wants opposed. So it's whoever God decides that day needs to go down to earth to oppose somebody is Satan for a day, because it's a title. And I'm looking at, I'll say, these books, The Origin of Satan by Elaine Pagels, The Formation of Hell by Alan Bernstein. So if anything we say interests you, these are the kind of books that I'm looking at. The History of Hell by Alice K. Turner, who used to be the fiction editor at Playboy magazine, if you didn't know who she was. But
that's why we bought Playboy, for the stories.
There you go. So one of the parts of the Bible that's brought up by, and I believe this one is Pagel's book, is when Balaam is on his ass and they're going, and the ass sees the angel of the Lord and turns aside, and Balaam hits the ass, and they have a discussion on, why are you hitting me?
So y'all probably got to go look that up, because most people
in the book of
don't even know
Numbers.
about. Yeah.
But the way they translate one of the passages in here is that the angel of the Lord took his stand in the road as his Satan, his in this case being Balaam, Satan meaning his opposer, the ones who are going to oppose him, and so he obstructs the progress of Balaam. And then after Balaam and his ass have this discussion, the Lord opens Balaam's eyes, and now he can see the angel, and the angel says, "I came to oppose you." So it's not that Satan is this angel's name, it's his function.
Which I say all the time, that's what archangels, their names are their function, right? That's their function.
So, but it could have been, the next day if God opposes somebody else, he could send a different angel, and then that would be with Satan for that particular,
I think that's interesting, because I hadn't really connected it, but the judges of, early biblical lore, sat at the gates, right? So they were the trusted elders, and they sat at the gate of the city, and if you had a dispute, you brought it before them, and then that was kind of the community's consent. So I think that's quite interesting, because in that case, it's not an adversarial necessarily, I guess you have, if you're accusing someone within the community, but if you're just bringing something to the judges, it's interesting to think that God has an accuser. God has a prosecuting attorney. Right?
Mm-hmm. And we see that in Job, because in the first chapter of Job, God and Satan, whoever is Satan for the day, they're having this discussion on, hey, have you seen my follower Job? But as Pagel says, that perhaps Satan here is operating as a roving intelligence officer, is her term, because God says, "What have you been doing?" And Satan says, "Well, I've been wandering the earth and roaming around to and fro." So apparently that's the job of a Satan, is to go down to earth, get the news, come back, give it to God. So he is like gathering intelligence on humankind for God.
I think that story comes closest to the archangels we meet in Lucifer, because it's almost like Satan's jealous of, Job's reputation as the best man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he has to find something, right? He has to tempt God to challenge Job, because he doesn't like the idea that Job is so virtuous and considered such, even by God.
And I find this wasn't in this book, but I find this interesting in reading these passages and then thinking about when Jesus is tempted, and it's this Satan that comes, and apparently perhaps from God, to come down and say, "Hey, Jesus, if you cast yourself off the corner of the temple, the angels will catch you." And Jesus is like, "Not going to do it. Here's a Bible, here's an Old Testament quote for you." And then they do this 2 more times, and finally the Satan is like, "Hey, you passed," So although you kind of see this, it's supposed to be this evil thing that's approaching him in the desert to tempt him, but if you just kind of read the passage, it could be almost like Balaam. Here's whoever's God's designated opposer for the day, and he comes down to say, "Hey, Jesus, I'm going to tempt you 3 times. What are you going to do about it?" And then probably goes back to God and says, "Hey, it's all cool. We passed."
Yeah. That even connects kind of with Job, right? Like, so here's Jesus, about to go off on this mission as a new rabbi, and so before he's worthy to be a rabbi, let's test him.
Yeah, but not.
And certainly as the Messiah, right? Like those who are saying that.
But it's not necessarily some horrible thing that's come up from hell to, tempt him, but actually God sending down a Satan.
Less like we think of it, like it's the devil trying to stop salvation, right? But no, I agree. The context that you're bringing, I think, really helps, and helps understand why many of us Christians nowadays, we just don't see it that way. We're not looking at some devil whose job it is to keep us out of heaven, right?
Yes, maybe this is more of the way the Jews would have seen it at the time, maybe as an accuser, but God's personal accuser, that He has sent.
It's also interesting in the concept that hell in this show is usually talked about in terms of your own kind of guilt or whatever. It's the hell of your own making, and so that does kind of present itself better with this, again, kind of almost a lawyer Satan,
Yeah, because you end up in this like little loop of your sin or your guilt that apparently you can leave, and even though no one ever has. So there's no doors.
Supposedly.
Yeah, supposedly there are no locked doors. You could wander out.
They should play more with that in the plot instead of all this weird stuff.
I really think, they need to send Linda down there with a couple other really good therapists, and once people can like cope with their own whatever sent them to hell and atone for whatever they did, then you can start emptying hell out. That would take a long time, but you could do it, and that would certainly give Lucifer something to do down there.
Yeah, that would be a much more appropriate way for Lucifer to rebel against Daddy, right? Like, to just empty hell. If he doesn't want to be in hell, empty hell.
Well, my suspicion is that's what Dad wanted to do the whole time, and he hasn't gotten to it yet.
Boy, there we get a loving God. Wouldn't that be fast? I'm always pushing for this. We'll see.
Because I have a feeling that's what Daddy's going to come down to sit. Maybe not, but that would be my feeling, is come down and say, "Hey, I put you down in charge of hell because you were the one of my children who actually had some compassion. And so far you haven't gotten anybody out of hell yet. What are you doing sitting on your ass?" So
yeah, instead you turn into a party boy. Right.
Yeah. So those are some of the early ideas of what Satan was. And then obviously that character gets developed quite a bit in early Christianity.
Not connected with what you just talked about, not connected with a hell place at all, right? Like I don't know of any context of where that's saying Satan is the keeper of the afterlife punishment place, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know if that's really in the Bible so much. There's really not very much about hell in the Bible. And even in Revelation, there's a passage where it says Hades, which you might take to mean hell, is itself thrown into the lake of fire and destroyed, which would imply it's not an eternal punishment if that is a hell where people are being tortured, that it only would then exist until it is destroyed in whatever tribulation.
Heaven and hell is a late development among Judaism, probably after being in Babylon, right? Probably connecting to Zoroastrianism and all those things, and then you come back and you have the hellification. So, yeah, that Pharisaic Jews believe in heaven and hell, maybe, but that's a very late development.
Yeah, so here now he's brought up the original afterlife, and it's not just for the Jews. I mean, if you look in the Gilgamesh, and you'll see the Sumerians, the Babylonians, all these people across the Near East, their idea of the afterlife is basically there isn't one. At best, you might, because the Sumerians called the afterlife the house of dust, and you just sat there with dust in your hair and dust on your clothes, and until you just sort of faded away. It wasn't anything you'd look forward to, but it wasn't eternal either. It was just sort of this, basically it's the grave,
And you get that shades and shadows which often is described in there.
So, as your body's rotting away, apparently your mind and soul are rotting away, and at some point that's it. There's really no afterlife to speak of. And in fact, and this is not moving to Bernstein's book, he says, like in the earlier parts of the Jewish scriptures, it doesn't even look like God has any control over Sheol, this grave area. And that once you get to Sheol, the grave, that you are outside the realm of God, and God can't do anything there. It's just beyond him. And it's only later, as they start developing their religion more, that God then gets control over Sheol and can do stuff with the dead. And that's even later, once people notice that it doesn't seem fair that the good and the bad alike go to this gray, dusty place where you just sort of cease to exist. It's basically oblivion. So you could be the best person or the worst person, and you get the same thing when you die. And apparently, eventually people are like, wait a second. This guy was wicked his whole life. He never repented. He never atoned for anything. And he and me, we're going to end up at the same place, which is nowhere. That doesn't seem right. And so it's much later you start getting this idea that let's separate out the fates of the dead, and so the good get good stuff and bad people get bad stuff. And that's a much later development in Judaism.
And because the heresy of horizontal eschatology says, if I have a good life, if I'm wealthy, if I'm powerful, if I'm healthy, and I'm happy and I'm good looking, it's because God loves me because I'm a good person and my parents were good people. And if you're sick or if you're poor, that means you were bad. So the punishment happens in life, right? Or the reward happens in life. But that, I think once that no longer becomes acceptable, then we start grasping. Again, I tend to know more the Greco-Roman philosophy, and that certainly squares better with them, right? Because they attribute to the gods their human sense of justice or injustice.
So it's really even then later that you even get the idea that there is a hell, the way we think of hell today, is not necessarily that old of an idea. And that there is this ruler of hell who is called now Satan as a name and not Satan as a title, or Lucifer. And we already went through how Lucifer doesn't really refer to that person in the Bible anyway. But that comes along later, and I guess Dante really picks up the threads and makes it into this thing that is so horrific and so imaginative that that's kind of the way hell's been ever since, right? That we just had this sort of Dante-esque view of hell ever since Dante.
Yeah, and again, it is really fascinating to me, this idea of punishment, that it's God's job to make sure we're punished. That, and that therein is the problem, right? If you're talking about a forgiving, loving parent God, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's really hypocritical to have a personal torture chamber. But, in the in the Middle Ages, though, it was seen as, like, I guess, a good thing. If you look at all those paintings behind the altars, there's something called abominable folly, and then I think that's Turner talks about it in the History of Hell. And at the bottom of the frieze is all these people being tortured in horrible ways, and in the top is God and the angels, and kind of in the middle are the blessed, and they're like walking up toward the angels and God, but they're also looking down, like they're because what's going on in hell is like heaven TV. So apparently it was considered a cool thing, or one of the perks of heaven, to kind of like sit around and watch people get tortured for eternity, which doesn't turn me on, but apparently would have attracted people in the Middle Ages, to want to view this,
Which is interesting, the story of the rich man and Lazarus in the Bible, right? Because they talk across the great chasm, right? And there we do get this idea that I'm in eternal torment, right?
But they're across the chasm, but yet they're in the same place, because the rich man says to the prophet, "Go tell the poor man to bring me some water." Well, he couldn't do that if there wasn't, a bridge or some way to get across this thing. So they've ended up in the same place, just with different fates. And you get the idea from what the prophet says to the rich man, that his fate's been decided by him. If he were to like suddenly wake up and say, "Oh, I was a bad person, I really mistreated that poor man," that maybe he'd, be let go from his torment. Because the prophet's like, "Well, that was the way you lived, this is you, it's on you." So you still don't have that whole, here's heaven way above and here's hell way below, and there's no communication.
Yeah.
So
I mean, even Gehenna, which sometimes is in the Bible, Gehenna is just the burning trash area at the end of the Hinnom Valley, right below the city of Jerusalem. So it's not even an idea of a torture place. It's just trash heap.
One of these books would dispute you on that. So yeah. That is the trash heap explanation I have always heard. But it is also the place supposedly where the Canaanites did their child sacrifices.
Oh, I have read that before.
So it did have this kind of bad reputation. Even, I don't know if anybody really remembered that the Canaanites did that there, but that people just kind of always thought that was kind of a bad place, that you didn't really want to be there, which is probably why they put the trash there, because who wanted to live there, right? So, hey, just dump the trash in that kind of evil named place. We don't want anything to do with it.
Well, the whole thing of the Canaanites, right? They had to vilify them because they would not worship the way that the temple Jews wanted, right? So yeah, they said the babies' heads were dashed on the horns of the altar there or whatever. I do remember that now. I think I dismissed it because it sounded like it was just an excuse to smear the Canaanites, which is usually what you hear in the Bible.
Usually, although I have been reading some articles lately on some of these Canaanite places where they have done some archaeological excavations and found an awful lot of baby bones. So maybe they did sometimes kill babies.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, maybe not as much as their enemies said they did. I don't know. We don't know. But it looks like it's for some Canaanites, it was a thing. So we get, in our show, then we kind of have, in the sense that you're making your own hell, it's more of an old, maybe Judaistic kind of hell. But there's ash everywhere, and he jokes about there being fire. So then it's kind of like mixing some of the more recent Dante-esque kind of things in there. But then he's not really this Dante-esque character, because if you go down to the 9th level of hell, Satan is this sort of huge, goaty, horn kind of thing that's sort of trapped by chains in this cold place, and he's gnawing on Judas or somebody, and so it looks like he's really a prisoner at the very bottom.
When you get Lucifer here in the series is more like Hades, just a keeper of the place, right, and an upholder of the rules of the place, not a personal torturer. Although the demons have talked about personally torturing people and things like that.
Right. Yeah, that is a little confusing. The hell of the TV show is a little confusing to me. I've mentioned I'm not sure why Eve isn't in hell according to their rules, because she did introduce sin to the world? And why is Abel in hell when he got murdered by his brother and God liked him better? So you'd think he'd be in heaven. It seems backward.
I'll emphasize you're quoting the story, not your personal beliefs. Right?
None of it seems to make much sense to me. So when the demons talk about torturing people, it's like, yeah, but everybody's in their own hell loop. So who are we torturing? Are you just like playing the little roles of, if I were in a time loop and it was something that I did and my parents are there and I relive this over and over. So it's demons playing my parents. Is that what the demons do? They're like actors. Or are they actually, but then they keep saying that Maze is the best torturer in hell. Who did she torture and why? Weren't they all in their hell loops? I don't know how this works.
Yeah, that one's weird. Was it Abel where they talked about, where she specifically said how they participated
got
in
bored.
this?
Because Lucifer says, he'll be easy to find. He'll be speaking Sumerian. And then Maze is like, well, see, we got bored, and so we put him through a bunch of scenarios, and we taught him a bunch of languages. He knows all the Romance languages, and he speaks English, and then Lucifer's like, so what you're telling me is that hell made him multicultural, multilingual, and great. So they have a hard time finding him, but although they don't, because he still thinks he's a goat herd from Sumer. But,
he's definitely horny.
Yeah. So yeah, the hell of the show doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, and we've talked about this before. It seems like they started out probably with the mythology that comes from the original comics books or whatever. But of course they've evolved. But in evolving, they don't stay consistent to themselves always, I feel like.
Yeah. So as I mentioned to Brian before, I really think that we need Linda and a few other therapists to go down to hell and empty the place out.
Yeah, I really think that would be a season I'd be interested in. Right? I'd love to see. I'd love to see Lucifer start freeing folks, right, by helping them know the truth, helping them, move on. Of course, I would like to see Lucifer move on. So.
Yeah. We had some character development, but it seems like there could be a little bit more. So, all right, final thoughts on the origins of Satan and Sheol and hell?
Just that if God is merciful and all-forgiving, hell is unnecessary. And if we're worried about those who aren't being punished enough, we're projecting our humanness on God. So, hell is a human place in my mind, right?
All right. So remember, if you like this, hit like and subscribe and hit that bell notification so you know when I put up more videos. And we will see you next time, which probably will be after the first half of season 5. So by that point, we'll have some episodes to talk about.
I think we'll have some strong opinions one way or the other.
We probably will. So we'll see you later.
All right. Bye-bye.